Well, monuments. This is a good one. I've got quite a few notes here written down, but certainly give you guys a chance to ask some questions, point some stuff out to you. There's a few things that he kind of points out that are kind of strange to me, or at least unique. Um, so we'll just jump into it, and if there's questions, comments, then we can stop. And I'm just going to read a portion of it again, like I do, but it says that first paragraph. This word brings forth different pictures to different people. To some, it means a statue or memorial to a great person or renowned event. To others, it brings to mind a stone, a tree, a post, or a fence. The surveyor remembers these also, but in addition, he thinks of stakes, iron pipe, brass caps, bronze plates, nail and tin, lead and tack, PK nails, spikes, and chiseled crosses in rock, cement, etc. On the other hand, attorneys consider not only physical monuments, but those that carry legal connotation and are used in descriptions and by surveyors for the control of boundary. So just get going off as going with that theme. What do you guys think of when you think of monument? Anything else to add to that list?
I would say really there's, oh, okay, crosses and rocks. I was gonna say natural monuments and that kind of stuff, right? Like
Yep.
going back to,
And we'll get into some definitions of monuments on the next page here in a second that he uses.
yep.
I know back when we did evidence procedures, I can't remember, was Jerry throughout, we talked about what is a monument. And, when we read these books, is it the section corner? Is that a monument, or is the property corner? We use these terms kind of interchangeably sometimes, but, perhaps, and Wattles doesn't get into this a ton, but do we need to be more precise in our language when we're talking about a monument? You know, Generally, in my mind, I think of a monument as the section corner, the street center line monument, those bigger, if you will, government controlling monuments. And then you've got property corners, which do monument the corner, but I consider those corners, if you will. Anyone agree or disagree with that?
I would say they're all technically monuments, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're getting into weird technicalities there, but I know
Mhm,
there's some
mhm,
opinions there for sure.
mhm,
I,
mhm.
I think you had an important pointer though. It's sort of like accuracy and precision.
Yeah.
Monuments and corners, we have a tendency to interchange those. And we talk about disposition of a corner, found, lost, or obliterated. We sometimes inadvertently use found, lost, or obliterated monument in that context instead of a corner. It's not really the monument that we're interested in. We're interested in the corner. The monument is a physical marker for the corner. So we got to kind of be careful on it. So now we're talking about some sort of physical thing. Whether it's at the corner or not is a whole other issue, but it's some sort of physical thing. This is the thing you get mad at, you can kick.
There you go.
Well, that kind of brings me into the next kind of
Yeah.
section I wanted to point out. Um, he says examples of monuments. He says monuments are classified in two general categories: legal or physical. Legal has to do with those matters which are in references deposited in the form of documents and in public offices. Physical refers to both natural and artificial physical things which are accepted and used as marking boundary lines and corners. Documentary papers such as deeds for a railroad or canal right of way, or easement deeds for a highway, pipeline, or power line, etc., are considered as legal monuments, reference to documents of ownership, such as a tie. So I think that gets into what Jerry said. The two types of monuments he defines here are your legal monuments. That's the theoretical location of a corner. It's it's the old GLO or BLM map that has a theoretical legal location, and then you have a monument that is supposed to represent that location, but may not always, if it was reset, remonumented wrong, or any of the above. I want to jump back one page though. There's something that kind of caught my eye on this one. the last sentence there on our beginning here, he says the question may be asked as to why a scrivener should have an interest in monuments. And I just thought I'd ask this. Like, this is the first time I think I've caught this where he's talking about someone that's writing a description versus a surveyor, a PLS, or someone that's intimately knowledgeable about the project. So I just wondered if any of you guys caught that or any thoughts on that. We may get through chapter 10 at this rate, guys. Let's
That's funny. Love it.
I mean, today, do any of you guys have people that are maybe writing a description that aren't? We talked about this last meeting, but that aren't familiar with the project at a PLS level, or even familiar with surveys in general.
Yeah, no,
Maybe just writing descriptions.
we don't.
Yeah, we don't either. Right? It's odd to me that you'd have someone called out as a scrivener. We just the surveyor is a scrivener.
There's statute law on this in Arkansas that requires a deed to be prepared by an attorney. And I don't know of any attorneys. Well, there's an exception to that. The landowner himself can prepare a deed, but the landowners, the attorneys here in Arkansas will almost without exception not supply the description for a deed, land description, and he almost always requires that be provided by registered land surveyors. I don't know, there are probably some land surveyors that will delegate that task to someone that's not licensed, but I never did. It's too important.
Absolutely. And I don't think many states have such clear-cut requirements, but it's a good practice to get into. It's something we've tried often in Utah to require, descriptions to be stamped by a surveyor to get recorded, and it always kind of dies through the process. But
I guess one question would be how many right legals starting from monuments, physical monuments? Like ours would be, say, from a centerline intersection, but we don't say beginning at a 2-inch brass cap at the centerline intersection of X, Y, and Z. We just say starting at the intersection or southeast corner of section, 21 or something like that, right? We don't physically say we're starting at a brass cap. So I'm curious on.
Yeah, that's one of those things, but I always emphasize that, see, Wisconsin, all of our descriptions have to commence at a PLS corner.
Yep.
Okay. So when we write, everybody starts with, commencing at the southeast corner section. And I always tell people, say what the monument is there, because over time, if you look at the tie sheets, what's defined as the southeast corner changes.
Yeah.
So that what's accepted now is different than it was 20 years ago, then any property tied to that monument that represented the southeast corner 20 years ago, that property doesn't get to move over.
Right.
So that other monument, even though it's not the southeast corner, has still got authority. So I think it's important that you identify the physical feature that you've either found there or placed there.
Yep.
that's a habit I'm really trying to build into my practice more and more after going through this again, is getting in the habit of describing what the monument was, and not getting crazy. I've seen descriptions where it was 1967 brass cap stamped county surveyor in fair condition, and they can get very verbose in that. But I am trying to make a distinction of this is the corner I've held, because I do have a few cases where that corner has moved, and now we're working through legal issues because of that, or trying to correct deeds that have relied on something that's in error.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like here, obviously the Las Vegas Valley, it's not predominant for us. It's always just starting at some kind of corner or even starting at southeast corner of lot one sometimes on a final map, right? But I do know a lot, say Arizona's more starting from caps than they do, corners, that kind of thing. So I'm just curious on how many may or may not even start from physical monuments rather than just aliquot parts.
How about any of our, do we have any of our East Coast friends on here? Describing that point of beginning to, sometimes it's just, it is the corner of the property and you describe where it is or describe ownership of those corners versus, coming to a section corner that doesn't exist out there on the East Coast. But anyone give any insight how you guys start your point of beginning, Ties?
Starting at the 18-inch oak tree.
Yeah. I don't see any of our East Coast names.
Well, have taught out there for 3 years.
I'm Jersey,
There you go.
and
Oh yeah, Joe, of course.
we usually start from an intersection. We do come across some in developments where just start between lot and block corners, and then just run around the property. But it's usually starting from an intersection or a PC from somewhere. So, just trying to think off, you might get some weird ones out in the rural area starting from a knot in an oak tree or something, but they're the ones I go to the office and say, can't find that tree. So
I know some of my work in Ohio, they were calling off of original corners of like a larger tract of land, right? That was, it's been subdivided a bunch of times, but every deed starts from the northwest corner of what was the overall farm tract back in 1880. So there's this common corner between everything. So it's not necessarily a center line, but it is some common corner to a large group of parcels that all tie to the same. I know Texas has a similar thing. They've got tracts of land and you'll call off some of the same corners consistently through those inside tracts. Okay, great discussion there, guys. Thank you.
Has regulations that from the state board that require us to commence at a PLS corner for all meets and bounds surveys, but there is an exception for platted subdivisions, and they don't have any requirements there whatsoever. You can just show the lot and block itself.
Okay, thanks, James. A couple of notes I had just finish out this example. So I just threw out a bunch of different types of monuments we call out. So Wattles talks about legal or physical, record monument, legal, physical, artificial, natural. Those are all different kind of subcategories of monuments, right? So if we call to a creek or to the edge of a road or the right of way or road, over the next few pages of this chapter, Wattles goes through a bunch of court cases and examples of kind of local ways of working. For example, calling to a road in different areas of the country, calling to a road means different things. Is a lot of areas calls, if you say to the road, it's implied that you're going to the center line of a road. But that may not always be the case. So he gives a bunch of examples and he kind of gives this test as well of figuring out what is the standard practice if you're not familiar with it. He talks about even, streams. And so I figure we just kind of have a discussion again here about what is the standard practice. If you're in your area, you have a deed that says calls to a road and it's vague, it's not calling where on the road. Kind of get a consensus of what you guys generally assume or understand to be in your neck of the woods.
Well, the assumption that I think we're making out here in Utah is that we're going to the edge of the right of way, not to the center, because the assumption is that there's a public right of way along that roadway. that is owned by the municipality or the county.
Yeah, I agree. Because generally speaking, what we read, Jeremiah is from Utah, like I am, is if they're calling to the center line of the road, if it's a sectionalized road, which is fairly standard, they're calling to the section line versus the edge of the road. At least what I see here. Anyone else want to throw their kind of their standard in their areas?
We have a lot of roads that are prescriptive in nature, and the governmental agency doesn't have any fee title to the roadway. And so you have to look back in history to see where the adjoiner owns. And usually if it can't be shown or the single grantor had both sides of the road, then he owns to the center. But when it comes to evaluating a deed, we have to look at the whole deed in itself and the situation to determine whether the intent was calling for the center of the road or to its right of way line. Irregardless, it winds up being the same thing. The grantee owns and will pay taxes up to the right of way line, but if that road's ever closed, he does have an interest to the center or to whatever his grantor owned at the time.
Yeah, and we'll get to vacations in the next chapter, right? Of interest and ownership to the center if it does get vacated or closed off, like you said.
I was doing a survey that was written up in 1871 and it went to the center line of a road. In 1871, how wide do you think that road was? A wagon trail? All I could figure out. And today there's a 2-lane road paved. It became really hard. I kept trying to find drawings of the area from locals. I never could find anything. So I had to accept where the road was today, not back in 1871. And it could push it, is the westbound lane of the road the original road or the eastbound lane of the road the original? So at some point you have to make a decision. It becomes hard at times.
Absolutely. And roads can be interesting too, depending on where you are in determining that is, where to get the records of it. In some areas of the country, it might be at the county road commission, and others it might be at the register of deeds or the recorder's office or a surveyor's office or the DOT. And so roads are always challenging too, just to find that information. And I know we spent some time talking about that a few weeks ago about where to get road information. And so you can go back to those to kind of get through that and find more on there. But it's always a challenge. I'm working on a road vacation right now that is through a lot and block area. So everything's north, south, east, and west and square. And then the DOT came in and took a winding road through it. And the map was from 1976 and has zero, angles, distances, and curve information in there. So now I've got to establish what the DOT took and then what the intended right of way is, which is proving challenging without any information. So one of the things you go to on roads is state statutes. What was the statute at the time that the road was created? And that's a big fallback in Utah, particularly is you go back to those. What were the laws at the time when those roads were created, and that gives a clear indication of what
I'd like to ask a question about these difficult areas there that we talked about, and the types of records. Do in most of jurisdictions have what's known as a ancient document rule. An ancient document rule, is that from something y'all are familiar with?
Yes, and we've talked about that here. I know John Stahl talked about it back at the beginning of this year. You know, generally 20 years creates an ancient document. We'll let someone else answer that for their local jurisdiction.
Nothing.
Okay.
Here in Arkansas, it's 25 years. And if you've got a document that's over 25 years and you can show that it came from somebody who would normally be expected to retain that kind of record, it's introducible at court, and it will be presumed to be correct unless there's something that rebuts it and shows it to be incorrect.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty general practice in most places. I don't know how it's codified in certain areas, but
Yeah, my understanding is that each jurisdiction, it's determined essentially through case law. It's a standard of the courts. It's not necessarily legislated. Statutory, I mean.
yep, yeah, probably so. Okay. Great. Just one last thing about roads before we kind of jump onto this to the next one is some of the examples he gives is if you're unsure, he talks about just laying out those deeds per record and just looking to see how they might line up, you know, along the roadway section to see what the standard of care is generally amongst a bunch of properties to see if you can't establish it. Look at adjoinings and adjoinings to see if you can't get some indication of what is intended to happen there, and if your property was an outlier, if you can determine what the road right of way was or what the call to a road right of way is, whether it's center line or edge of road or edge of right of way. So that's just a good kind of gut feel check as you go through there to see what other people are doing, what other properties do in order to check that.
I guess I have a comment. So in Indiana, there was a lot of state highway work done in the late 1930s. Right of way was acquired, but wasn't recorded until the late 70s or early 80s. And so there's this big gap between 30s when it was acquired and 70s or 80s when it was actually recorded. I know on a lot of state highway projects, they're buying that over because they didn't feel that they had clear title to it. So I guess that could really change things, I guess, when you're working in Indiana, that somebody may have known that right of way existed and they were measuring to the right of way that was acquired, but they didn't really have clear title to it. So that's kind of an interesting thing here in Indiana that's happened.
And that reminds me, I see quite a few in one of the counties here in the rural areas that the deeds call to the section lines, they're sectionalized roads, but often the deed will say less than accepting excuse me, any road interest. So it hasn't ever been acquired like in fee title, the road hasn't, or any by right of way maps or acquisitions, but it's just been accepted out of the deed over time by a conditional clause at the end, which is always an interesting one too. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, the next section, Wattles gets into the value of monuments and evaluating them. And he just says, before one approves the use of a certain monument, either for survey location or control and a description, it should be subjected to an analysis on the same basis as those individuals who want to get into the Elite 400 Club. Each one must have background, character, and recognition before being accepted. A simple illustration of this is a section cornerstone. If it has been described in the surveyor's field notes, it has background. If it carries the markings called for, it has character. If in addition to these, it conforms to the position in relation to other objects, it may then have recognition. And by the sum total of this analysis, it can be accepted. Any questionable monument should be subjected to such review before accepting it. And this is, we've gone over this time and time again in here. You know, we're always told that the monuments hold, the monuments hold, the monuments hold. And yet here again, we're being told to evaluate it, and without saying it, he almost says, well, the monument might not hold, right? It might not have good character or good value. So how do we determine that? We get stuck in this cycle of unknown, and particularly with training our younger surveyors. Why wouldn't the monument hold? What happens when we find this one that it doesn't meet all these criteria?
One doesn't fit the others.
What's the old Sesame Street song? One of these things isn't like the others.
That's right. Exactly.
It's a challenge, and so that's where the mentorship of the profession comes in. Is you do have to understand the history of the area you're working in, and evaluate that and see. And there are areas here where I practice where we actually have 3 monumented section corners, 3 physical monumented locations for the single theoretical corner, right? And so depending on the date that those were in, then your deed might call to one or the others, and they've done a good job over time of calling out which date is section corner on the deed for that. I see some tech chats here. Sorry, for some reason on my other screen, so I gotta pay attention. So Harmony, I have issues with my property and road. Texas ranch land sold to San Antonio City, and roadway with no clear title is declared a trail now. Deeds are all screwed up. It's a 1929 subdivision. Now that's interesting. Howard, you want to kind of talk us through there? Because the trail is the one that throws me off there.
Yeah.
Oh, let me tell you, this is layered with surveyors and money and real estate. I mean, a nightmare for me. And to contest, like you're saying, legal documents. And how do you get legal? You got to pay. You got to pay lawyers. And so somewhere along the line, the original fence line, which was a monumental barrier from like 1853, some plat in Texas, and someone at some point moved the fence and took like 850 feet along a lot of people's 5-acre lots, and they created a roadway. But it's not like paved with anything. It's just caliche. And so when it was sold for $5 million, that land in the back, there were 2 surveys, and one of them, in order to get the money from the 1% sales tax in Texas, San Antonio, they had to put their caps on it with the names to make it legal. So Nature Conservancy got involved with it, and they kind of brokered it through to get the nonprofit status for the back tax, I guess. But they then turned, and San Antonio Parks and Recreation a park. So they've declared that strip that wasn't actually a declared road ever at any time. Now that is on maps as a trail. And I would so much, I really want to address it. I don't know how. I'm just praying. I'm glad to be in and listen to what you're saying, because you are talking about what the books are saying is law, is legal for a profession. And I'm noticing that the lands now, it's been sold, and these surveyors are replotting. and I'm challenged by it.
Mm.
I would like to, it needs to be addressed, otherwise they're rewriting history. But I like how you said it goes back to 1800s, and it really does. All these things do. It's just a matter of bringing it to the plate, to the courts is essentially the deal. And what's happening is the city, Texas, they have like now, is it $2 billion trust fund for land, to buy land for parks. And so with that comes all the legal fees and the money to do these things. And TxDOT, I mean, they write the maps for everything. And it just seems, I really don't know what to say other than you're the group I need to like listen to. And then I need to find a lawyer, I know, but it's the deeds, and then it's not just the deed, it's a survey. And those are legal descriptions. And the descriptions are being rewritten.
That's always the challenge of our job as a surveyor, right? Is we're tasked with following the footsteps and creating this map that tells a story, right? And doing the research and going back far enough to tell the whole story, and then to play quasi judicial role of making boundary determinations. But
right.
again, at the end of the day, it's, as we read in these books, that they both tell us that it's our job to make those decisions. And at the same time, he says, well, no, you can't make the decisions. Only the landowners and the courts can.
So what they're doing is they're using these, like they're using their cell phone with apps, and they get it all pinned out on their phone or their app, and then they walk it, and then they put their pin in the ground, and then they know how many feet to walk again and put it in, because they've already pre-calculated before they come. Because that's what happened. Somebody came out and they did that on my place. And I kept saying, hey, that's not where it should be, because I remember I saw posts here, or I've been here 35 years and I know that's not where it should be.
Yeah,
that's
what we deal with every day is that type of stuff on both ends, right? Like, it's an interesting challenge for sure. That's why the good surveyor gets that expert witness, goes to the extrinsic evidence and goes outside the parcel and looks at
That's
it.
good. I like your book. I'm going to keep listening to every chapter. I appreciate you letting me join. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah, happy to have you here. It's good to have a non-surveyor's view in here, because sometimes we're speaking in an echo chamber. Those that are here, those that want to learn and do better. So this is.
I'm the homeowner. I'm the homeowner, the resident who's senior citizen now with no cash to contest, and it's a challenge. It's legislature, it's our state representatives who now sponsor bills, and then the bills get put on the vote. Like November is when it got voted. And if you look who's behind the rep, he works for a title company of all things. So, I mean, we could use the word fraud at some point or another and keep repeating it over and over, but I'm not going to say that. But that's what.
Well,
that's like Taylor. Go ahead. Don't mean to disrupt, but thank you.
Hopefully you can pull some ideas out of this and the language we use to be able to speak with them about that. That's the whole point of this, right? It's to grow this is why we do it, Harmony, is to grow our younger surveyors to speak our language and make them better than we are.
But see, they won't speak up. Those younger ones won't speak because it's their job. They're going to lose their livelihood. And that's what this all boils down to, is the ability to maintain in a profession and get work. And a lot of these people are working for big companies, you know what I mean? Or they're starting out and they're afraid.
Yep.
And
then hopefully homeowners like you stumble upon this. I know I've gotten a few projects myself because of a landowner Googled me that was here in the area looking for surveyors, and she found this, and it's like, oh, this is the guy I'm going to use. So hopefully
great.
Everyone wins on this one. So I appreciate that, Harmony. Thank you.
Okay.
James has some comments here.
Yeah, I've dealt with some similar issues. Now, I can't speak to your particular issue there, but I've had something kind of like this. It involved section corners. A lot of our corners in my particular area were never monumented with stone. They were monumented with a green posts. And none of them were left after the 1920s or 1930s surveyor walked off from them. And even the witness trees that were taken were often lost. So we're dependent upon replacements of these. And generally in our area, the landowners of the area were taxed with maintaining that section corner because there was no governmental authority to maintain it. So if there is a object that is well recognized near where you would expect to find the section corner, the court is going to rule for it most of the time. And in your case, I would start with the idea concept that somebody owns the land. Somebody owns the land. Look back in history and prove what points can be made from way back in history. I had a section corner that was lost in before the turn of the century, but I was able to reconstruct it from material marks on the ground and fences and some records that were left at the courthouse from God knows 60 or 70 years ago, handwritten copies of the GLO notes, but so it was possible to replace that section corner, but it wasn't easy. But somebody owns that land. And if you can go back in history and follow the land ownership through the decades, because that will lead you to who owns it today. And somebody that's not willing to do that or is just speculating on where the land lines are.
Yeah. And I feel really bad for the landowner in a lot of these cases, because I got a case, our client is a famous movie director with loads of cash, and a surveyor says, the point's over here, and it's like a quarter into his driveway, and the poor homeowner, obviously, as surveyors, we don't really, we do our best jobs to tell you based on best evidence where the property corner is, but ultimately, the courts decide. So poor guy, if he was ever going to take it to court, and unless he's got enough pockets, unless the judge rules on it quickly or they come to an agreement, the movie director's attorneys could draw it out and keep delaying. They could bill on for millions of dollars, and ultimately the guy could be tapped out of cash because attorneys, unless there's attorneys that do pro bono work, but I don't know if there's any attorneys that I know of that just do pro bono work to help out landowners. So it's kind of sad.
That is the hard part. That is in anything in life. That's always the challenge, right? Some other stuff in the chat that came up here. So Brad said in response to what corners to hold, you hold it one time and reject it the next.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. And then it sounds like Vegas is going to have a roundtable sometime in August on exactly that discussion. So that should be a pretty good one.
Yeah, our southern chapter, we're working on doing a roundtable based on different original corners, hold or not hold, and breakout sessions and that kind of stuff. So it'll be a lot of fun. So
it'll be a pretty good one. So great.
I've got a question about these monuments that we find out there, and obviously, if there's a monument there between, say, two lot corners, and one of the owners comes out there in the middle of the night and pulls the monument up and moves it over 3 or 4 feet and drives it back down, obviously the property line should not move. Yeah, I hope everybody would agree to that. It's not, that the property line doesn't move with the monument, even if it is the original monument that the first surveyor set. It's only good if it's in its original location. And so you get to a point of what evidence you present that shows that that monument is or is not in its original location. And I'm interested in what kind of information that y'all have used to confirm or disprove a monument.
I do have a story that goes with that, James. It was a BLM corner that was set recently, just probably last 5 years or less. And the property owner moved the BLM cap, but he did not move the magnet. And so they were still able to find the magnet that correlated with the original corner. So that was obviously an easy bust on that one. But
I've got one I've shared on here a couple times. It's an ongoing one. And the challenge is you've got reliance on the old corner and deeds that have been passed, but then you also have new subdivisions that attempted to correct the movement of the corner along the east line of a section. And so now you've got two different sets of deeds or ties, if you will, between different properties and two different corners that are being relied on. And it creates a mess. You know, from a legal standpoint, you're absolutely right. The boundary line is the boundary line, the property corner is the property corner, but the record still needs to be corrected. And that's kind of what I want to get into when we get into chapter 10, when we talk about title, record title, legal title, occupied title. There's a bunch of different types of titles or locations. And just because we all understand that the property line is the property line, there may still need to be a correction in the record. And that's the next step that we always need to kind of get to in these discussions that sometimes gets overlooked. So Trent, showing this is the corner that you had there, right?
yeah, Joe just put this in the chat. So I circled what I saw, but I'm wondering, is there another corner possibly, or is it just those two, Joe?
No, that's just the ribbon off the monument from old.
Okay, yeah,
old
I
road.
wasn't sure, but yeah. So how do you disregard that original concrete monument, right? I'm sure that came first before the cap.
Yeah, that's an old Reuter monument from he was from Camden, and he was from the 20s and 30s doing surveys, and the other guy was probably in the 90s. But that's the thing. This is my whole grief. Here in Jersey, almost everything is to a point, to a point, to a point. It's rarely called to a monument. But if you pull the file maps, which aren't always that easy to get here in Jersey, they're not, all online and everything. But if you do your research, you know that Reuter did the monument or did the subdivision. And then if you find this, how can you hold it off? I mean, but that's holding someone coming from the left and not doing the due diligence of looking. And if you want more, I got hundreds here in Jersey. I mean, it should. South Jersey is going to be known as the pincushion capital soon. So
Yeah.
Well, it's known for worse things. So
yeah.
But here's the thing, Joe. We've talked about this before too. You were starting to kind of echo it in previous discussions, but in evidence of procedures for boundary location, it's made very clear that the measurements that were used to set that old Reuter's monument are the measurements we should be using today, right? But we still measure out to 100th of a foot and we say that monument's off, but that's as good as they can measure, right? If you were within 2 feet of that back in the day, the surveyor then wouldn't have said anything, right? He would have said that's the corner and moved on. But we get lost in this idea that I can measure better, and we forget that caveat of the laws. We measure to the accuracy of that survey, that deed, that era.
Plus, we have a tendency to figure that ours aren't infallible accuracies either. That when you come up with that monument location you set has also got an error associated with it. So you're going to have overlapping errors.
Yeah, the problem is trying to explain that to a client who thinks that your monument measurement should be and must be precise. That was a conversation I just had right before here. And I mean, you get caught up in an inch or 4 inches or half a foot. And we'll say that's within our measuring tolerance or it's close enough, but it doesn't, it's not something that's easily explainable to the lay public. You got to figure out a way to talk to them about that.
Absolutely.
That's the other one that sits on Facebook, the profile picture for mentoring Mondays. But
The way I handle that is I ask them, you know, do you go down and buy gas and you get $10 worth of gas? And you know, when you put it in there, that you got a little bit more than $10 or a little bit less than $10. Maybe you got shorted just a eyedropper full, but you got shorted. You know, are you gonna raise hell about that? Are you gonna make a federal case out of that? You know,
This guy,
well,
yes.
this inch or two here that you're talking about between these pins, it's not significant. Forget it. You know, I'm not going to put a pin out there alongside of one that's within the tolerance. I might say on my plat that I found a pin and it was 4 or 5 hundredths in some direction different from what I expected to find it, but I'm not going to say that it's wrong.
I always lift up the gas hose and try and like get those last drops out.
So you do that too. Okay.
Now,
So
if I come along and I'm working in a platted subdivision and I find a corner that is of the original type stuff that was used to monument that survey, and it shows one lot, both lots are shown to be 100 feet wide, but the corner is set such that one lot is 98 foot wide and the other lot is 102 foot wide. And I look down there and there's nothing there that lines up with that oddball monument there. No, I'm not going to recognize that monument. I'm going to set one where it's 100 and 100 and go on.
yep. So there's a couple things. Just let's wrap up this chapter. I appreciate this discussion.
yeah, I was just looking at like we got a half an hour left, but
Yeah.
I
So
had-
8.9 here.
sorry, I had to share Jerry's screen.
Yeah, share Jerry's screen real fast. While I read this, go ahead and share that, and I'll read 8.9 here. And Waddle says, in making use of monuments, remember that the prime requisite for a monument to control over course and distance is to have it recited in the deed. Right. So he's going through this like, you know, when does the monument hold, when does it not? And sometimes it might be what's called out in the deed. Does it call to a monument, natural, artificial? And you might lengthen your bearing and distance to match that call, right? But it needs to be in the deed in order to do that. And so that's why that first discussion of, do we call out the monuments we're starting from? Do we start making reference to, it was a 1967 one, but now I'm doing a survey today, and it's a 2020 monument that's been reset, and were they reset perfectly in the same location? Maybe, maybe not. But the more we can be descriptive in that, the more we can give clarity to future generations that have to recreate our garbage when they complain about us 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. And the last thing, 8.16, third to last paragraph, he just says, the statutory rule for preference of monuments over measurements is for use as a crutch and for constructing a description, and does not mean that the court may go outside the instrument to find a monument not mentioned therein as a means of making the description in the instrument fit the monument. For instance, in the citation, beginning at a point on the east line of section 35 north, 1321, 13 feet from the southeast corner thereof, being the northeast corner, the southeast quarter of said section, as shown on a record survey map filed in the county recorder's office, and where the total distance is also shown for the whole east line of the southeast quarter, 2,600 some odd square feet, which distance should be used 1321 13 feet, or split, which equals 1322 36 feet. Because the citation gives both the 1321 13 feet and the quarter corner reference, which by split would be 1.23 feet further north, one needs the corroboration for the crutch, as it were, of some outside thing to help make a decision. So, really long kind of sentence there with some examples, but it's a tool for us to use when we have some uncertainty there, is what he's trying to say.
I'm really uncomfortable with using a monument that isn't referred to in a deed or some legal writing. Not that that's completely out of line, but I noticed that I don't know whether any of the other people here looked at these footnotes and the cases that were mentioned, but I found the cases, some of them were really old and I couldn't find, and they're not well, I don't know, they just don't seem like good law to me, but there were a number of them that were really good things to look up, but they weren't really on point to what he was discussing in the narrative. So, in that regard, I don't know. He didn't prove his case to me. I still want to see that monument mentioned or referred to in some manner before I'm going to accept it as the monument. Now, if my analysis of the thing and the records of the history indicate that that should be a monument that does control, then I will use it. But not just simply because it's out there. It has to have something more.
I think you've hit it right on the head there, James.
Yep.
Your analysis of it. That's what we're getting to in a lot of this, right? Is we don't take it at face value. We don't just because it's there, we hold to it. We need to evaluate every piece of evidence and in our narrative, make an argument for why or why we did not hold some evidence found, and put all our cards on the table. I was in a discussion this afternoon. It's with the local school district here. They've got a industry partnership, and we were talking about what the high school teachers need to teach and focus on, and they actually brought up field books. They use Project Lead the Way and a couple other nonprofit education groups, and one of the first curriculum that Project Lead the Way has is they give them a notebook, and they have to keep a book throughout the year. And so those that know me know I've always got my notebook on me. This is my office one, but in my vest behind me, I've got my Ride in the Rain flippable notebook for all my field stuff. I've kept them all since I started surveying over 20 years ago. They're all in a box and they're archived and even indexed by year, so I can go back to them and have on occasion. But I pulled it up. I pulled it up right there in the discussion. I pulled it out of my pocket. We were able to open up and look at the notes on calculations and projects I'm working on right now. And we kind of talked about that. But in the discussion, thing I said is, and I tell this to my field guys, I don't care if you screw up. I do care. I don't care if you screw up as long as you documented how you screwed up, because then we know it, right? If you determined a property wrong because of the evidence you had, if you've documented that evidence on the face of your survey, I'm never going to hold that against you, because as a second surveyor coming in that and retracing yours, I can see what you did and ask you questions or present some new evidence that I have and say, hey, did you find this? And we can have an intelligible discussion. But it is all about our analysis there.
You just brought up a good thing, Trent. So last Thursday, I just went. So Project Lead the Way is what I help a lot of our high schools with here as well. So the engineering curriculum, and there's a auto leveling section within Project Lead the Way, which is the spring of their junior year. And we just went and ran levels with 75 kids last week. But ours was just clipboards and copies of, kind of a makeshift book. But I think next year and I've been doing it for years now, probably 5 years or more, but I'll have to make sure that I bring the field books next time. So I didn't realize that the Project Lead the Way makes the kids have the field books, because I never see any of our kids that are our high schools that are using Project Lead the Way have a field book. So
Yeah, they're supposed to have it for all their classes, kind of a journal type thing. And
yeah, maybe that's a Utah thing. Nevada, all the different Project Lead the Ways curriculums that I run to at each one of our high schools, none of them have a field book. So.
Interesting. I'll have to ask more questions on this end and get you some information.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I love it. I push Project Lead the Way though. That's our way into our schools with the CTEs. So
Yeah, it's a great program for that. I just get mad because we've got a major industrial manufacturing university in our backyard. So our schools really focus on that portion of Project Lead the Way and forget even civil engineering, let alone surveying in their curriculum. They just breeze through that. So I'm pushing that pretty hard here.
Yep.
We've got about a half hour left. I think we can get through chapter 9 real fast. There's a lot of redundant stuff we've talked about in previous chapters when we've talked about curves, talked about road right-of-ways, talked about retracements. But there's a couple things that I think are worth probably the discussion through the rest of our half hour here, and that's dedications and abandonment, because it's not one we've touched on yet in either of our books. And so let's just get the discussion started here real fast. Is what are the laws in your state in regards to either dedication or abandonment, vacations of roads, or any other road laws that are unique to you guys that you may know?
yeah, ours is all vacations, and then relinquishments for easements. Dedications, obviously for roadways, but yep.
Now we've always called or I always have called easements vacated as well. Is relinquished part of your statute language?
Yeah, that's what they use. Yep.
I'll have to double check that. Off the top of my head, I don't know. I can quote the law here, but we always call it vacation for both. But that's interesting.
I don't know if it's the same thing with all states, but I believe with dedications, you also have to have an acceptance. I'm not 100% certain because I'm not all that
Yeah,
privy, but
I was gonna
Public
say,
dedications you do, yeah.
yep. And sometimes there's only maybe one or two Californians on tonight. I wish Bush was on tonight, but California, there's a separate acceptance document. You might put it on the map saying it's dedicated per this map, but then they would have a separate acceptance document. They may not accept every right of way that comes or dedication.
yeah, that's what I believe, because sometimes if the improvements weren't done or the bond wasn't all put up, they're not going to accept it or something. That's the office problem.
Yeah. It'll be your problem soon, Joe.
Yeah. That's why I'm here learning. So
that's right. I love it.
Yeah. In Utah, I'm not familiar with an acceptance document, but it is dedicated and accepted on the face of a subdivision plat. And the city's acceptance is their signing, accepting, and recording of that plat.
Yeah, that's how it is for us too.
But it is interesting, the thought process of, because they do bond for some of that. They have a 1-year warranty, and usually that's held hostage by building permits or other things. But I'd be curious. I'd have to look into that more with some of our cities of, what if those meets haven't been met, right? They didn't meet their bond, or they didn't meet their warranty or something outside of holding up a building permit.
For us in Arkansas, if you do a subdivision and you dedicate certain portions of that as a right of way, it essentially passes that right to a right of way to the public. It doesn't require any acceptance whatsoever, but the whoever is going to expressly maintain that does not have any authority or obligation to maintain that roadway until they do accept it formally. So that's the way it's handled in Arkansas. And one other thing about Arkansas, if you have a dedication like that and it shows lots on it, and it shows a dedication for a street, and that street may be shown as being 50 foot wide or whatever. But that dedication of that street is junior or subject to the lots. In other words, if you wind up with a 49 foot wide easement through there, that's what you've got. The lots hold. And that's a little backwards maybe from whenever the county or the city condemns a strip of property and makes it into a street, then it holds and the private property is subject to their line. Am I making myself clear on that?
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Mhm.
Hey, I'm listening to you. Is it okay if I say something?
Yeah, of course, of
Okay.
course.
Okay, so I don't know the terms, dedications and all that, but I am in an old subdivision and that was like a straight line in the back, but now it has changed. And like I told you, somehow that roadway, which was an easement or something happened. So, and of course the city has interest and the county and the state of Texas because of what's behind me now. But can I put up a roadblock? Can I put something, a barrier to keep them, put a fence line up to keep them from using it? Like you talk about abandonment or vacate or, you know,
So that would be
is,
more a legal question that none of us would ever touch with a 10-foot pole. But
Or
here's
in
the thought
Texas
process.
with
Let's maybe
Avara.
define some of these terms to help you understand. So when we talk about a dedication, so your 1929 plat or a plat that I have one on my desk I just signed today, right? We're dedicating to the city a road that becomes public. So the developer has a piece of land, he splits it into roads and lots, and the road essentially he improves and then gives to the city. He dedicates it to the city for the right to be able to improve and do all this. And so there's language on the face of this map that says, I hereby dedicate. It's essentially deeding to the city. It's a process in which he conveys this road to the city.
right,
It's just a legal document doing it. Now, there are times we've got old Pioneer in Utah, old Pioneer alleyways that are behind lots. They used to be like the garages used to be in the back, or there used to be just a
right,
little alleyway for the garbage truck to come in. And it gets to the point where those are no longer used for the intended purpose. And so the homeowners will come in and they will work with the city to vacate it. That's a pretty common use in this area when we vacate it. And so what happens is it's a reverse process. The city then gives that their interest, their ownership in the
yeah.
in
I can't
alleyway.
do all that, communicate with the city because the city is so big. It's money. It's big. It's got so many layers. It's so much.
Yep. And so it's all about ownership. So that's a challenge without knowing your case or knowing this.
Right. No,
Could
I
you
get,
block it off? Could you not? That's a harder thing without getting into it. But in defining these terms and what we're saying, the vacation of it is the city then turns it back to the homeowner or the landowner. And usually, well, always, it needs to be in some equal portion, right? You can't take, if it's a 60-foot road right away and there's homes on each side, in most circumstances, you can't give that full 60 to the south homeowner. It goes 30 and 30. It's an equal split because the government has to be equal to its citizens, if you will,
right.
in the vacation process. And we'll touch on this here in just a second, but I see that Jerry's got his hand up, so I'll let him do it. And then while he talks, Trent, do you want to pull up 9.6 and we'll
Yep.
get into some of how we vacate it? Jerry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that with regard to the easement and putting up fences and all that type of stuff, as long as it's still a legal easement, it still exists, then you can't do anything that's going to interfere with the enjoyment of that easement. So even if it's not being used for ingress and egress, if you put a fence up on it, that's interfering with the enjoyment of that easement. And that fence can be taken down at your expense. So you don't want to just start doing stuff like that. And the laws on abandonment and whether an easement disappears because of non-use, that varies jurisdiction to jurisdiction. In Wisconsin, if it's a public easement, it has to be formally released. It can't just be go away because of abandonment or non-use. See,
I
that's
think you're right. You're
stuff like
you're
that.
right. It's all legally. All these things are, you got to go by the book. But the man who talked about the original monument, that's where it goes back, 1850 or 60 or 1929. Not what they make up along the way. You're right.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. You just keep it on. I'm listening. It's a good deal. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So then getting to 9.6 here. So we've talked about dedications. We're starting to talk about vacation or abandonment. So the question of the exact outline of those areas in the street, which would be apportioned to and attached to their respective parcels, is seldom raised until the street is vacated. There appear to be no settled rules of law detailing the outline of areas concerned in this matter. However, one court case, State versus Superior Court, held that the division of the vacated street should be based on the prolongation of the side lines of the lots as shown in the subdivision map. The adaptation of this method was also decided upon in Oklahoma. In some states, such as Kansas, the reversion of areas in a vacated street is based on the proportional frontage. In one California case, it was held that the conveyance of a lot by reference to a tract map showing the boundary street carried with it the grantor's fee to the center of the street, even though the street had been vacated. A problem arises if the lot lines are acute and cross each other before reaching the center line, and there would appear to be not only an inequity of distribution, but a question as to whom would acquire this crossover area. And so Wattles, like he's done in some of these other areas, pulls out these really unique cases, which certainly do and have happened. That's why he brings them up here. But they make for some very interesting what if questions, right? And discussions. And so I just want to kind of point out some of these areas as he shows these acute angles or these corner street vacations. That would have to probably be worked out in some sort of discussion between homeowners in the cities and find the most equitable way of doing that. But there's certainly some unique situations that he shows here. And so I figured I'd throw that out to you guys for just a little bit. Any thoughts on his figures? Have you ever had to deal with a unique street vacation like this? And how did that turn out?
Well, I would approach the thing as looking at who the original grantor was to that part that I was going to be surveying, and I would limit my lot to any limitation that it had, that the grantor had, and extend it maybe if the grantor owned the entire area that was used for the street, then I think that landowner is entitled to recoup that same thing. Where you have a subdivision and has multiple lots were all created at the same time, and in those kind of cases on both sides of the street, then you're looking at a center line limitation to the addition to any individual lot. And here I would present that of a addition based on a perpendicular line with a center line, as is shown in figure 56, I think. The reason behind that is, what if they only vacated a portion of it? If they only vacated down from a 2-lane lane or a 4-lane road to a much smaller street, if you went by the angles of the lots, such as something like figure 55, you might have a lot that has a street frontage on the after the vacation that is much smaller than what he originally had, and it might be so small that he has no effective access then to the street, the new street. And for that reason, I think that's a good argument to the court for that line being perpendicular to the center line of the street. I don't know how y'all feel about it, but that's what I would go by.
Yeah, I would just caveat that I understand and agree generally, maybe a case by case basis where I might sway from that, but as a general rule, I think that's a fair assessment, fair approach. Any other thoughts on that? Okay, Joe just throw another one up here. Asked, do you think this this deed is a right-of-way taking or an easement? Let's pull this one up and just go through it real fast here. I've got one that I've dealt with. It was is a right-of-way deed, but it was assumed and intended as ownership and went through some back and forth. And look and see what pops up on this one. And why I do that, Jerry talked about reversionary rights, which is the next page over, reversion of title. I'm looking for.
It'll be down another page. There you go.
Is this the actual recorded deed then?
This is the recorded document.
Yep.
Welcome to Jersey.
And generally speaking, in Utah, that would be considered a fee title type transfer because it's a deed and not necessarily an easement, which we want to have on the header of the document, the type of transfer it is, and some language that goes along with that. But
I haven't seen the whole document, but I'm not seeing the conveyance language. Where is it?
page 1
Hey, bud.
does have, it says parties, grantor and grantee. In return, the grantor grants and conveys to the grantee all the land and premises.
Oh, there you go. Yeah,
Township. So to me, that would read as a
that
fee
reads as a
title
fee.
type transfer. There's
All
my
right.
analysis for you.
Well, go down to the actual
We're
description.
gonna have dinner in a while, so
What's for dinner, Nick?
Yeah, I know. I just muted it. Yeah.
So here's the thing, like, so when you look at deeds, and this is getting into title and legal issues, but generally that conveying language is the top is what controls, that's what the intent is. And then there's language in the description or other stuff that would be then secondary to the conveying language to that. But there are plenty of cases where the deed is confusing.
It's actually even a little bit below this where it says temporary site mitigation work line to be something to be
bottom
moved.
paragraph, the above described premises are colored. Quoted on exhibit B in the following manner: red, fee parcel line, brown, temporary site mitigation work line. So it looks like there's a fee conveyance and then a temporary construction easement is the way I would understand that. A temporary easement to build the road, but then a fee conveyance of the road right away itself.
I love the subject, however, to all public utility easements, recorded or unrecorded.
Most of them are unrecorded. The exhibit is actually on, I believe, the next page down. So.
Yeah, so I'm guessing that that bottom line is the fee conveyance. It's not color coded, and this is the hard part. Always got to color code a recorded document because they just get colored in black and white.
Yeah, but it calls it a temporary site mitigation work area, 398 square feet. And then additional temporary
Yeah, that's your
work
temporary
line.
that dashed line there, and then the fee conveyance is the darker. So that says 16. Yeah, I'm more confused than ever, but there you go.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that. Um,
Glad we could help, Joe.
So
We'll stick with the West Coast.
yeah. So Jerry, you threw in there revisionary rights in streets are as problematic as ownership gained by reliction. Same types of issues. Do you want to just walk through some of the challenges and issues with revisionary rights and what those present when we talk about streets and dedications?
Well, I was just referring to those diagrams of figure 55, 56, and so on, when you, because we have revisionary rights and subdivisions underneath the streets. That's right in our state statutes. It says if the street's ever pulled, then ownership extends to the center line. But it doesn't say how the ownership lines extend to the center line, whether they're straight projections or perpendicular to the center line or whatever, radial if they're curved and that type of thing. And those are the types of problems that we're looking at in figures 55 and 56. But if you look in, even in the manual of instructions, we talk about the Long Lake method, the Pine method, and all these different ways of when water recedes and you gain ownership from that additional uncovered lands and that type of thing. Boundary lines also extend with respect to that, but there's all sorts of different ways of doing that. And it's the same type of problem you have when you've got reversionary rights in the street, when an easement goes away or whatever. How do you extend those lines without having them cross each other, or to come up with something that's equitable for all the owners along that gained area?
Yeah, we've talked about that in extending property lines through waterways or lakes. There's quite a bit in this book and in evidence procedures that we've kind of talked about those challenges and some methods of evaluating the best, most equitable way of resolving it.
And the thing that we need to always make sure that we maintain, and however we're doing this, is consistency. So that whether it's a right that's gained from a reversionary right in a right of way or an easement, or one from reliction or that type of thing, we approach it the same way to give it the equitable solution to the affected landowners.
We've also got situations where we will somebody's vacating right away and it ends up becoming a kind of a dead end street where they've got to reserve a cul-de-sac at the end for fire department.
Right.
And safety and cul-de-sacs and stuff like that, right? So it's not always fair and equitable, right? You're giving up cul-de-sacs and things like that for fire safety and public health type stuff. So
there's just one unique situation that I want to point out with streets. So again, we've talked about this. Utah is an old pioneer state, and when the pioneers settled pre-statehood, they set lots and blocks through many of their settlements, and they're square equal blocks for the most part. In Salt Lake City, our capital, the way they've approached that is the centerline monuments are actually not the controlling monuments in it. It's actually the block corners are the controlling monuments. And there's been quite a few mistakes and surveys have happened as surveyors will hold the center line, but as they've widened or vacated portions of the streets or done things, the centerline monuments actually move if they're true centerline monuments, or if we want to call them a monument line or something like that. And so there's quite a bit of interesting surveys out there where a surveyor that might hold a centerline monument in a different city tries to make the same approach in Salt Lake City, and it doesn't work because centerline monuments are not the controlling corner. It is the actual block corner there that controls. And they've actually moved corners or centerline monuments in some of the Salt Lake City streets, and someone will measure off of that and create problems because they don't understand that principle. So a unique street situation, definitely unique to us, but it's just understanding, it illustrates the need to understand the local jurisdiction within which you work, right? Even if it's in the same county you generally work, but if you don't work in that city, don't understand that their controlling corner is the actual block corner, you can run into some trouble.
Trent, I'm gonna tell the city surveyor you called it a center line.
Yeah, I've got to be careful.
What's the true words?
It's monument line. They get really uptight if you call it anything else. They'll correct
Okay.
your plat and everything. It's
Oh, funny.
precise.
Yes.
Okay. That's great. That's great insight.
The city surveyor is one of my really, really good friends. So go ahead and tell.
Yeah, that's why I think it's funny.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's even better.
For that reason, I avoid Salt Lake City. It's in my backyard, about a half hour from me, but I almost refuse to do work in the city because I'm not familiar enough with that stuff. I work in the areas I know better. So, oh, Brad, I see your comment here. Kyle responded to you. I apologize. I missed your questions up top, but Kyle, Brad, if you want to connect with me too, I'd be happy to further some of the discussions there that you asked about calling off a monument. Why call it off? Showing bearing distance if you're not going to set your own monument. If it's far enough to call it off, wouldn't it be far enough to set another one? We can talk about that in another class. Happy to talk with that.
That's a
offline.
3-hour conversation.
that is. So I think another great discussion. I'm glad we got through both chapters though. That was huge. So thank you guys.
That was fun.
That's all I got for tonight.
I think we want Harmony on next week for occupation versus title.
Oh, I'm coming every week, twice a week. And I want all your links from the last year. Perfect.
They're all every one of these is recorded, Harmony. They're on the website.
So much.
Yeah, of course. That's awesome. I love that you jumped on. So what are you thinking? Part of 10 and then maybe like a first part 1 of chapter 11 next week?
Yeah,
We were gonna also, for everybody jumping on, we're gonna go next week to April 17th because April 24th I'll be at the NSPS spring meetings, and so I thought, and then I had a lot of things going on that Wednesday night, so it was gonna be hard for me to kind of start it. But if we want to go back to back and then finding ways to get through before the summertime, I don't know how we want to do it, but we've got chapter 11 is going to take a long time to get through. So quite a few sessions there, but and then we're getting through a few easy ones. But April 17th, next week, chapter 10, and then part 1 of chapter 11.
Part 1 of 11. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I'll shoot it all out again, but that's awesome. Fun. Great stuff, guys. I love it. And then mentoring's back this Monday, so and then so we'll have mentoring and wisdom Wednesdays next week. So.
And Nick never answered my question. What's for dinner, Nick?
I know. He left us.
He did.
Oh, there he is.
Hey guys. I'm gonna make some yakisoba noodles with chicken. My wife's out doing dinner with a friend, and my mom's here helping watch kids for the next couple days.
Oh, there you go.
It sounds good to me. So
Love it.
Okay,
Thanks for the
night,
presentation.
everybody.
I was just listening while I was drafting.
Yeah, no, it's cool. There was for those that follow along on Facebook, the Life of a Surveyor had some very interesting conversations today. So it was that was a good one. So follow that one today. But all right, we'll see everybody next week, Monday or Wednesday next week. So thanks for jumping in.
Thank you.
That was fun. That was a great conversation.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.